Okay, I'd like to start with a question. How many of you worked with Scrum at any point of time? Okay, definitely most of you. So you probably took part in retrospectives as well, right? So one of the things that happen quite often on retrospective is a situation where we get to the conclusion, okay, there is a problem. We're aware of the problem, but to be honest, you're not the only team that has this problem. It in a way affects everyone, so bear with us. Someone maybe will do something about it, or maybe not. Maybe it's almost impossible to solve, as you, as a single Scrum team, cannot influence something so much bigger, like basically your entire organization. And what I'd like to show you is how we in our company approach this problem to create a way of solving problems affecting entire organization. So first things first, who am I? And why do I believe that I can share something with you? I'm currently a Scrum Master. I'm fulfilling that role full-time for almost 2 years now. I used to be a Java developer for around 6 years. So yeah, right now I'm supporting 2 teams full-time and trying to support also organization and help to introduce changes that are needed. And I'd like to, basically, I'd like to tell you a story. I'd like to tell you a story of a company which is based in 3 different countries within 4 locations. There's over 17 different nationalities in it, and therefore 17 different cultures, and more than 150 developers. I know what you're thinking. These are 2 countries, but if you look very closely, there's the 3rd one. Malta is a very small but lovely country. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. And this company had a problem. Basically, what was happening, there was a constant blame game. You might be familiar with it. The problem of whatever happens, it's the mythical them. They did something wrong. We're fine, but they are the source of all the evil in the world. So this was happening across all the levels between different locations. And one of the things we thought we can do to improve that was introduction of so-called tribes. You might be familiar with the term as it's used, for example, by Spotify. I'll start with disclaimer. This is not the exactly same thing. It's somehow inspired by it, and this is, let's call, our own implementation. I won't focus on it, but I'd like to give you a bit of context. So basically, IT department split it into, let's say, for simplification, 4 different tribes. And what are those tribes? Each of those tribes was a group of people that was focused on a single domain. But what we did on purpose, we separated every tribe between different locations. And for absolutely everyone involved in the company, this was completely new experience. In such tribe, let's focus on one of them to give example. There were multiple development teams that depended on the tribe, from 4 to 8 development teams, an entire group of product owners that were supporting those teams, leaders of this tribe, a few architects, Scrum Masters, and even a mystical group called champions. And we thought about starting with a document which told us, which showed how we want to work. What's our vision? What are our domains? How we want to work? How we want to handle, for example, incident management? And this was, in a way, like I said, starting point. But we knew that, okay, some of the things that we just introduced are working, some are kind of working, and some of them definitely not working. And what we can do about that? we thought that we can, in order to make it smoother, faster, at least see what are those areas. Some of examples of what was not working at that time. No reliable automated mode test. Switching priorities quite drastically without even having time to finish the project that you worked with. You might be familiar with that situation as well. You have project, you're full on it, then legislation changes, and you have to leave it as is and start something completely new. And the project you stopped will be picked up sometime. Who knows when and in what state. So we figured that we have to take a break and ask ourselves a completely different kind of question. So instead of thinking, what's the next project? What's the next priority? What's the next task? We decided to figure out how are we working? How are we doing our work on our daily basis? And this is where the idea of having a slightly bigger retrospectives comes in. Instead of having a retrospective for a single team with, let's say, 8 to 9 people, we wanted to have input from everyone in this tribe. So a group of, let's say, 50, 70 people. And how to even start something like that? Gather 70 people in a single room and start asking questions? Might not necessarily work. So what I'll do right now, I will share with you how we approach this topic and what we believed, at least originally, that is the best way to go. So we started with the definition of what the retrospective is. This is a quote from Scrum Guide, which says that retrospective is opportunity for a single Scrum team to find what it can improve within next sprint. And what we came up with was, like I mentioned, to have something bigger, this time for entire organization. And yeah, introducing changes on this level will probably take a bit more time than a single sprint. So how did we do it? We started with this very question. There are things that work, kind of works, and doesn't work. In your opinion, what are those areas? So in order to find those 3 areas, we defined a slightly bigger 5 steps retrospective. This is the structure that you might be familiar with. Maybe you haven't seen it yet, because usually retrospectives that we do within 1 hour tend to skip at least some of them. So first of all, we have to set the stage and prepare everyone for what is going to happen. Then, out of all of these people in the department, we need to get the data. We need to learn what they already know. Later on, next step, generate insights. It might be the case that people don't only notice the problems, they have some ideas how to improve on what we're doing so far. And in the end, you have to decide what to do about that knowledge, what to do with those ideas, and in some way, well, close this retrospective, so it won't go forever, and you have to decide what comes next. The activities that we came up for each of those phases were, first of all, we needed to explain to everyone, what the hell are we doing? No one knew this. This was completely new for everyone, so it's not like you can just come in and start having this meeting. You have to communicate properly to everyone in the department. Then we figured, okay, each of the teams knows something, has a piece of this knowledge. So we could get Scrum Master from each team, talk to the teams he's supporting, get the necessary information, and then represent the team and discuss common problems. Once we'll get information from all the teams, we can see that, okay, this one looked to the team like it's too big for them, but if it only happens in this one team, maybe they can handle it. But if something happens in 6 out of 8 teams, that's probably a bigger issue, and it requires some support from entire tribe. In the end, quite regular stuff, so create action items, real plan, and assign it to people who will look into making sure that these actions will happen. And at the end, whatever was decided, whatever plan was created, you have to communicate that to everyone who will be affected. So once again, entire tribe. And who should take part in each step? Just think about it. You got 70 people. Should all of them stop their work and go for, let's say, 2 days of meetings? Will that be optimal? We thought that at this stage we can separate it in such a way that first thing, explain what we're doing, can be handled by Scrum Masters who will talk to the teams and explain, okay, this is the plan, this is what we would like to do, this is what we would like to achieve. So expect these actions. Second thing, Scrum Master and development team, basically entire Scrum team, gathers the data, and then all supporting roles. So basically, every not developer, so product owners, Scrum Masters, architects, even those champions that I mentioned earlier, we're trying to find the common problems and come up with solutions, with a plan what to do. And in the end, to communicate this to entire tribe. And when does that happen? First part have to happen before we'll start all of those meetings. Then separate regular retrospectives, like within your regular every 2 weeks retrospective, one meeting would be slightly different. Then that biggest part, the create the plan part, we figured it would be the best to do it face-to-face. Keep in mind, we're in 4 different locations, and that's a lot of tough problems to discuss, and such discussions happen much easier face-to-face. And on the second day of business trip, we were able to communicate whatever plan we created on the day 1, with this exception that those teams who were based on different locations could join via Skype, although it's no longer for a huge discussion, it's just to learn what's the plan. So, getting to the details. Step 1, simple. Explain everyone, meet with your team, no problem. Step 2, gather the data. How much data? If you've got, once again, 70 people, and who gives that information? We figured that the best way would be to introduce a limit of top 5 priorities from every team. It can be 5 things that you're super happy with, or 5 things that you're not so happy with. It's up to the team to decide what they want to share with the rest of the tribe. This is their opportunity to be heard outside of the usual group, outside of the usual room, to bring some topics to attention of an entire department. Then, we put all of those ideas to the wall, all of those topics. Later on the second picture, you can see that we grouped that into specific topics, basically. For example, this was related to infrastructure. Some of these are working, some not really, but from a methodical point of view, that's correlated. And in the end, we separated those topics between groups of us, randomly set up. So it could be like 2 product owners, architect, and Scrum Master in one of the tribe leaders, and so on and so on, coming up with solutions for some of those ideas. And then we placed all of those action items and good practices on the board. Let me slightly zoom in to show you what I have in mind. When we were coming up with those plans, we realized that, hold on, half of what we've got on this list is not really an action item. Action item is something you can do, see on the list, check, it's done, okay. But half of what we've got were rather new practices. So every time that this and this situation happen, we should handle it like this or like that. So we separated those 2. And to give you some examples for it, okay, one of the topics, Scrum Team collaboration. There were 2 action items that could have been done once and checked, like we had exercise called Agile Health Radar, and we were also doing some assessment of the team, of the tribe morale via survey. But there are also some things that were requested. Could you please start doing this and that? Like, we've got a product owner who learns during the daily that there is a new team member. And it would be beneficial to know that upfront. Or another thing, product owner was not aware of people planning long-term vacations. So you plan a project, and suddenly, during one of the sprints, half of your team is gone. And you're not able to do as much as you have planned. So we're learning about some of those blind spots this way. And the last thing that we did was basically gather everyone from this tribe in the room and yeah, communicate the plan that we prepared. This is what we thought that would work very well, but we did a lot of mistakes. One of them, when we were gathering the information, gathering information from one team, that's great. From two teams, still good. But from everyone, it turned out that we had on this first tribe retrospective 70 topics to discuss, and each of them was a priority to someone. So it turned out that we are trying to conquer it all at the same time. That's mistake number one. Besides that, when we were deciding what to do, at some point of time, we figured out from one of these retrospectives, we came up with 29 action items to do. We managed to do 13 of them. 15 were in progress. One of them turned out to be blocked, at least temporarily. And how do you feel when you come to next retrospective and it turns out that we didn't do yet half of what we committed to? That's also not really motivating, isn't it? Yeah, basically we committed to too many action items. That's mistake number two. This fancy plan that we had, we thought that we were at least getting right people in the room, but what we learned was, when working on it, when we were generating insights, there was not a single developer in the room. They raised some concerns, maybe they had some ideas how to fix them, but we as Scrum Masters presented the given input, but then, during generating insight, during deciding what to do, not a single developer in there. So that's third mistake. Moreover, Scrum Masters were exclusively focused on making this entire thing happen. So it turned out that we didn't have anyone to represent the point of view of Scrum Masters either. And in the end, we ended up having product owners, tribe leaders, architects, and so on, solving problems that other people came up with. So you can imagine how it affects engagement and motivation, or even understanding of the problems, when you're basically solving problems that you never experienced, and you only had some of the context along with 69 different topics. So there is more and more of mistakes that we did, and that last meeting that I mentioned at the end presented the entire plan to entire tribe. You can imagine sitting in a room and hearing about 70 topics that 5 of them affect you is not necessarily very engaging. So it was simply very boring for most of the people in the room. That's another mistake. Besides that, I mentioned at the beginning that there was a problem of, well, blaming each other across locations. And we didn't do anything to solve that problem. Basically, what happened to a big extent is people avoided the conflict. They, at first of those meetings, only raised those topics they felt comfortable. They didn't want to risk talking about very critical things and in front of such wide audience. They didn't know if it's safe. After a while, they started to share those ideas, but not during the first meeting. So what we had instead was artificial harmony. Besides that, basically what we did, we created a comfort zone for everyone in the tribe. As you might think, when you're assigning action item on retrospective, it's probably the best idea to assign it to people who volunteer or at least are in the room. So we didn't assign any of those action items to people who were not there. And like I mentioned, not a single developer was there. So what we did, we took the problems from other people. We told them, okay, feel free to complain about anything you want. You've got no accountability for it. You don't have to be engaged in any way. Just complain and hope that someone will fix it for you. So as you can see, that's a lot of mistakes. And even though we got also some feedback. Feedback which said, okay, yeah, these things were not great. But come to think of it, a few months ago, we had a bunch of problems, and now 13 of them are gone. 15 more are about to be gone. And we're the only tribe who's doing anything about our problems. It turns out that, yeah, the process is not perfect yet, but we're getting better. We already improved, well, 28 things in a way. I calculated how much we improved over time within, well, slightly less than a year. Within 20 sprints, we introduced 42 problems that teams considered that they cannot solve by themselves. That's more than, basically, that's 1.5 improvement of the impossible per sprint, and not on a good sprint when it went well, on average, all year long, getting rid of the biggest problems that we had as department. And it turned out that after a year of having something like this, we got much better. To give you some examples of the topics that were raised during such meetings, this is from one of the last ones that we had. The target architecture was voted as the top priority. Besides that, things like roadmap or even end-to-end responsibility. Developers were not sure, are we just responsible for writing our code or maintaining it? But maybe also we should check our logs. Maybe we should set up some alerts. Maybe we should take action when those alerts are showing something. So it turns out that even after many months of working this way, there are still dozens of questions, serious questions that we should have answers for. Some of the examples of changes that we introduced, for example, regarding that regarding that target architecture. How many of you have microservices in your companies? Okay, and are you aware of all of them? What they do, how many of them even are? Yep, that was also the problem in our case, so we came up with the idea, maybe we should have a document which provides an overview of those services. Same thing. How many of you can name all of your stakeholders for your current project? Or even tell me if your stakeholders are happy with what you're delivering. We had the same problem. So we decided, okay, it's high time to identify those stakeholders and start inviting them. And one of the things that I'm particularly happy about is we're having these meetings for a while now. And it turns out that from the original situation we had, when everyone's blaming each other and well, basically saying it's their fault, now we argue about what's the best way to go. We basically became, in a way, one team, and we're trying to solve our problems together instead of pushing them towards another team. As you can imagine, if we learned that we are doing so many mistakes, we also came up with some improvements. So, what did we change? What did we improve since we started having those meetings? Yeah, basically, like I mentioned, we had a lot of problems and we are getting better with them. One of the changes, we opened the door to everyone for all the stages. It's no longer at this step, there are Scrum Masters and product owners and someone else. No, If you want to take part, you can take part in every single of those meetings. If you don't want to, feel free to skip all of them. The idea is, if there is a single thing that you care about, a single problem that you want to raise, solve, and maybe you even have an idea how to solve it, you can look through the entire process, convince others that this is serious, this is important, and make sure that it is happening, even get it assigned to you. So with this, we got developers to participate, we got Scrum Masters to participate, we finally got people who are really engaged in the process. Besides that, like I mentioned, since we opened the door and now anyone can come to the room and take part in the discussion, anyone can say, I will look into it, I will take care of it, I can be accountable for this action item. We also started to communicate what action items were done, because imagine also, you raise a problem and you never hear anything about it anymore. And in some cases, it was solved. Someone took effort to fix that thing, but we didn't communicate that at the beginning. Besides that, we started to prioritize our action items. And we decided that we'll focus on top 10, and only then we'll pull more of them. So instead of trying to solve all the problems at the same time, we are together discussing, okay, what are the top priorities? We also started to involve other tribes. One of the things we learned was that a lot of problems that we are having is connected to our cooperation with infrastructure. So we invited them as well. They joined us, they gave us also some feedback, they listened to our feedback, and after a few months we heard that out of all the departments in the company, the cooperation with this one works in the smoothest way. Besides that, we decided that we have to make it more engaging, we have to make it more fun. So what we did was we introduced an exercise, a small competition. So we split the entire audience into a few groups. They were competed against each other, and yeah, they won some award. There was some fun connected to entire thing. We even started to promote those retrospectives with posters, which turned out to be working in ways we didn't predict. As for example, people who are in no way involved with our tribe saw it, figured, this looks interesting, this looks like something we could do as well. We'll join you, we'll take a look how it works, if it works, and now we are no longer the only ones who are having those tribe retrospectives. It's becoming more and more popular among entire company. We also had a small 1 hour long retro for just those supporters. Turns out that sometimes product owners are not really comfortable with sharing some of the problems with everyone from the tribe, and they could speak up about some of them with a smaller audience. Limiting input, it still works, but in a very different way. Instead of saying you got 5 cards, or you got 3 cards, or you got 1 card, we just made sure that it's not expected from every team to come up with 5 topics. Instead, we switched to volunteers. And having volunteers instead of forced, in a way, feedback, limited it to last time around, I think, 17, 20 topics instead of 70. So it got much smaller, and it was only the topics that people cared about enough to come with them and discuss them. So as you can see, we introduced an entire group of improvements, made it fun, involve another tribe, or communicate completed actions. So I'd like to sum up. If you take a look, we tried in a way to care of every problem that, that we were able to notice. I'm sure there are many more that we still miss. If you notice any of them, please reach me after this meeting. I would love to introduce any kind of improvement in this process for future, as we're already doing this for a year and a half, and we're still having those meetings on quarterly basis. So we're constantly changing something. We're every time doing it in a bit different way and introducing some improvements. So yeah, they're missing developers, now they participate. We're solving other people's problems, now we encourage them to participate, and yeah, they can work with us throughout the entire process. We were having too many actions, now we prioritize them. So we're trying to solve whatever problems we noticed. And we also got quite positive feedback. On the left side, you can see a picture of a happiness door that we had during one of last retrospectives. And we got exclusively bad notes from the team that lost the competition. Other than that, people were quite happy about it. And I'd like to finish my presentation part before we'll proceed with discussion with a call to action. Call to action to all of you to think about it and think how you can try to implement this idea in your organizations, how you can take a break from your current project, your current priority, and ask yourselves and other people in your organization what you can do to improve your entire system, your entire company, in a way. Do you have any questions? Do I do the retro of the retro? Like these big retros, do you do a retro after? Okay. Yes, we do. After having this meeting, as organizers of it, we're having a separate meeting where we're thinking, okay, what went well, what went wrong with this meeting, how we can improve it over next iterations. And that's also where this feedback comes in. That's how we came up with most of the improvements that we introduced so far. And besides that, we also follow up on those action items. We have separate recurring meeting, and on bi-weekly basis, we need to check, are we making progress with the stuff that we decided to do? Yes? Okay, the question was how often do we do this retros, and we do this every quarter. So basically 4 times a year. We started with twice a year, but it turned out to be quite a long period of time. Instead, we wanted to have smaller amount of action items, but to solve them while the topics are still pressing, still fresh. And right now, the amount of things that are coming out of those retros are getting smaller as the most pressing topics seem to be solved. What would I see as the next step would be to keep getting this entire process smaller. So far, it's still quite time and energy consuming, and I believe that we can make it smoother over time. Yes, that's additional thing which is aimed to solve the problems that you believe, okay, we as a team internally, we cannot influence that. We need support from whoever is in charge, and especially in cases like the cooperation between 2 departments doesn't really work, and I as developer feel forced to accept that fact. With this, you don't have to accept that. You can get the support to solve it. But other than that, we still have our retrospectives every 2 weeks. Yes? Do you have any problems with getting volunteers for actually raising the problem and then after you're getting on the action? Constantly. Okay, the version that I presented was our original idea, and that's one of the reasons why it was in a way forced at the first iteration. People didn't know really how to approach this, and without being familiar with the process, we didn't expect too many volunteers. So first iteration was in a way obligatory. But over time, people got used to it and learned that this is bringing value. This is actually changing things. So now, whenever we have someone who has a problem that that needs some support, worst case scenario, we'll get that support in 3 months. Best case scenario, you'll get it even sooner. But the amount of participants is getting smaller. I hope that's because we're getting better, but there's no way to say that for sure. Yes? Okay, I'll repeat what I heard, and then you'll tell me if I heard it right. Is there one person who's making sure that this will work the way we planned? More or less. Okay. We're splitting this responsibility. We've got an entire team of Scrum Masters. There's 4 of us at the moment. And we're basically preparing this upfront together and discussing how to approach it. Also, as part of implementation of improvements we came up with after our retros. And once the 4 of us will come up with the plan, then we divide the responsibilities for specific parts of it among ourselves. Otherwise, it might be quite overwhelming for a single person, especially that, like I mentioned, this is happening besides our regular responsibilities towards product owner, our Scrum teams, developers, and so on. This is our way of helping organization as something additional that we want to do. I believe you also had a question. Okay. Okay. Some of them are quite small. Some of them can be taken care of right away. For example, people mentioned that they don't have enough knowledge about, let's say, a roadmap. So on the next day, when we're communicating the plan for what we'll do over the next 3 months, the roadmap was one of the things that were communicated. So that was done literally on the next day. So it didn't take much effort. And in this case, we were able to say, okay, yes, this is definitely solved as we just shared that information. In some cases, we'll not know if the problem is truly fixed. We'll know that we managed to execute the plan that we did, that we agreed that should solve the problem. But then we'll have to check if the problem still occurs. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, then thank you very much for your time and your attention. If you'll come up with any other questions or with any suggestions, feel free to meet me at the corridor and share your impressions. Thank you.